What do progressive voters across the country who are constantly, fighting over the same little piece of the pie, how do they come together and actually build something that can win and make change? I don't think we have got a conversation about energy in this country that Canadians trust anymore. From the industry's point of view, it's a huge liability. Everything's got to be on the table. I don't think you can out of hand say that particular technology we are not touching. Whether that's clean coal, which is currently kind of a false flag, whether that's a next generation of nuclear, whether it's renewables we haven't even thought of yet, whether it's oil and gas. What we need to do is have a serious conversation about what stuff works and what doesn't, and what needs government support to get to where it goes. If you can see a place, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when I first started researching this stuff, solar was a future tense fairy tale, and it stayed there until a number of governments, particularly the German government, said, no, we're going to make solar a mainstream technology. The great thing about the Greens is it's a party still learning and evolving. So if I'm the second member in a two-member caucus, I have a huge say in what policy looks like. You're not going to get that deal from anyone else running in Calgary Centre, I can promise you. One of the greatest resources that Canada has is the human resource of immigration. To shut out the actual path to citizenship and just want the labor is ridiculous. We mutually benefit by granting Canadian citizenship to people who work hard here and by them coming here and becoming Canadian citizens. Canada benefits from that. To take that and kind of throw it out rather hastily is really, really bad policy and really, really unfair to the people who come and work and give their adult lives to the country. And this was Elizabeth's genius, and probably the moment where, much as I've always respected her, I was willing to kind of go into battle with her, was watching her by herself turn what was supposed to be an omnibus blur into this 22-hour marathon, standing ovation from the rest of the opposition. Look at all the amendments she attached, which were all really smart, pointed sort of things about that shouldn't be cut, that shouldn't be cut. If you look at the cuts, it really wasn't to streamline government, it was to eliminate the government's ability to catch itself out on stuff that it wanted to do. The public service is an incredibly important and deeply undervalued job to do, and there are skilled people who know what they're doing, and to sort of suggest that it's fundamentally less efficient and less valuable than the private sector is entirely wrong. I think that goes beyond just people working in the public service. The whole public sphere has been undervalued for too long, and I've been talking to a lot of scientists who will tell you that they are feeling moved to act politically in ways that they never have before in their careers, because this is such a reckless sort of slash and burn approach, particularly to environmental science. If you look at, there's been a lot of stuff around, but environmental science is really where the deepest and most precise cuts were made, and I think that's where the Green Party certainly could lead that conversation to say, hey, we're not a one issue party at all, but we can certainly contribute to the conversation about what a modern environmental stewardship regime looks like, particularly because Elizabeth wrote a bunch of it when she was in Brian Mulroney's environment ministry. We have an economic system that is predicated on a particular model of growth, and I would argue that growth is mainly predicated on the idea of cheap energy, and that you can continue to grow the amount of energy in the economy on that same scale. That we need to pay the full price of the things we do. One great place to begin that is, of course, by putting a price on carbon dioxide. What we are finding in the current sort of system of drug laws is that they don't work very well for people anywhere along the line. Prohibition makes the production more dangerous, makes the consumption more dangerous, makes the sale more dangerous, fuels gangsterism. The idea that harsher drug laws would reduce gangsterism goes against several centuries of gangsterism and everything we know about it. Harper government's crime bill is fundamentally anti-evidence, fundamentally against what we know to work. Before we can actually get into the bigger conversation about building all of the transit infrastructure we need, which takes budgets and bills and policy and debates and the rest of it, we can start just making the transit we already have much nicer. The other way I like to say that is we can make it awesome every now and then.
Let's do this. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
My name is Mark Hopkins. I am the host of these things called We Should Know Each Other parties, which I've been doing for just about 5 years. And the whole premise of these parties is that we're better off as a society, as people, if people from different trades, different age groups, different socioeconomic statuses, that we're all meeting each other. Usually we just get together in my living room and we have some chips and we have some beer and we talk. But every once in a while, I sort of come across a person that we in particular should know. Back in 2010, that person was Nahid Nenshi, and that worked out pretty well. And now in now in 2012, I've come across this young gentleman named Chris Turner, who I think is of particular interest to us in this room and to the city as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, you should know Chris Turner.
Well, thank you. First of all, thanks to huge thanks to Mark. We Should Know Each Other is definitely his baby and his little universe, and he doesn't give it over to a single proper name very often. And so I'm proud to be able to stand here, apparently roughly the same spot that the mayor stood, probably in roughly the same spot in his campaign, where there were a lot of people who were starting to get interested in this thing, but maybe weren't sure just how interested they were going to get, just how far could this thing go. And I'll come back to that, just how far this thing could go. But in the spirit of the thing, I will begin with a little bit of getting to know me without hopefully being too self-indulgent. Mostly what I'll do is tell you about my history as regards the city of Calgary. I was not born and raised here. I was born and raised a military brat. Ask my wife, she blames any bad linguistic tick I have on the 3 years I spent in American schools. Eventually lived in Cold Lake, Alberta. Spent 5 years in Cold Lake, Alberta. And my only experience, we always went to Edmonton, like on weekends to shop and to go see a movie and do all the things you couldn't do in Cold Lake at the time. But once, during the summer, we came to Calgary, and I had an old friend whose family had been transferred to CFB Calgary, and I went to stay with him, and he had like a single parent, single dad, so much looser rules than I was used to. I was in grade 8 at the time, I think, and or just going into grade 9, and he was allowed to go on the C train by himself and go downtown. And so Calgary was actually one of the first cities I was ever downtown by myself in. We came probably within a block or two of here to an arcade, where I saw all kinds of stuff I'd never seen in public before. It was very, very exciting. And I always had this very, Calgary to me, and I think I was sort of unique this way, was like the big city. That was big, riding the C train, going downtown. That was what Calgary was in sort of my head. But then, eventually moved on, lived for many years in Toronto. I think thought that was where I was going to be. Eventually met someone who had grown up in Calgary. She's in the room, of course, Ashley Bristow. She was not intending. She's the Calgarian in the room, or the Calgarian I'm connected to in the room. And we used to come back to visit family and that sort of thing. And I had, I think, a pretty typical, Central Canadians disdain for Calgary. I didn't see a lot happening there. I thought this is a city that, is mostly about making money and living on the periphery and going to the mountains. I didn't really have a sense of the place. And I could tell you a lot of different things, but I remember the first time I had an inkling that there was more to this city than met the eye was we were back visiting old friends of hers who lived in Mission, and we went to this pub that they clearly loved. And I remember walking up to the pub and thinking, this place looks like one of these crappy chain pubs that every city's got a million of, pretend British with the blank and blank pub. Oh, this is going to be in the ground floor of this nothing concrete building. This is going to be just a great evening. And of course, inside is, and I'm not just saying this because it's in the writing, maybe the best bar in Canada, the Ship and Anchor. One of the all-time great drinking rooms in the country. One of the few places where one of the things that struck me coming from Toronto, all ages, all walks of life, really a meeting place for the entire community. It served much more purpose than your typical hip downtown bar in Toronto. And I remember thinking, this city, there's more to this city than meets the eye. And we eventually wound up, for a variety of reasons, settling here, not thinking we would stay that long. This was in 2003. I basically chased my future wife here. She went first, and then I had to chase her here. And I didn't know how long that would be for. But we decided, getting married, starting a family, let's buy a house and see where this takes us, so to speak. And I really do feel, although it makes me, the bearer of perfect timing or something, but we landed in Calgary, it feels like at the exact moment that it was beginning to have a serious conversation about what kind of city it wanted to be. That for a long time, and maybe this disdains what had happened prior, and I don't mean to, but it seemed like all of these conversations that I remember happening in cities like Toronto that I'd spent time in, where everyone had already decided, this is what we are and now we've just got to go do it. Calgary was still this wide open conversation. We're turning into a big city. We've got big city problems, big city opportunities. Where are we heading as a city? And what really struck me and what got me excited about being here and staying here was that people kept stepping forward who had really, really great ideas about where that goes. And obviously, the most pointed example of that, the guy who stood here at another We Should Know event, Nenshi, would be a great example of a guy who stepped forward with great ideas about where to take the city. But he's definitely not alone. It feels really like there's a building momentum in this city, and that's really the reason why I'm interested in entering politics, and which was not necessarily where I thought I was going to be spending this fall, wanting to become the first non-conservative member of parliament for Calgary in 40 odd years. And the reason for that, the real reason for that, I won't get into, I'm not going to talk policy. You can ask me questions about policy if you want. But the real reason for that is I firmly believe this is Calgary's moment. Not just here, but for the whole country. We are really, as a city, the really great urban idea lab of Canada right now. I think we are coming up with some fantastic ideas. I think this is an incredibly exciting time to be in the city. And I don't see that energy and that ambition and that optimism being represented at all in our current crop of federal politicians representing this city. And so what I would really like to do, first of all, is convince everyone in this room that we need your help, not just your vote, but your help. This is a campaign about Calgary, about what kind of Calgary we want, and the only way we are going to get where we want is if we have the most Calgarians on our side. Not just the most votes, but the most people with the best ideas, the biggest group of volunteers doing the most everything. This is the only way we do what we are planning to do, which is to tell a story that hasn't been told in Calgary in a half century about a progressive actually winning on the federal level. And it will be an incredible story when we finish it. And this is really the opportunity that I'm hoping to be a part of. I don't even like to say I'm going to lead it, because I really feel like I am just the guy who wound up at the steering wheel of an incredible vessel that is just starting to really chug along now. And where we get to is a place where we look back on having honestly changed the course of Canadian political history. I really think a Calgary win for the Green Party right now would be a fundamental, powerful message, both about what this city is, what kind of city it is, and what kind of government we need. Not just in terms of which political stripe, but in terms of, what do progressive voters across the country who are constantly, fighting over the same little piece of the pie, how do they come together and actually build something that can win and make change? And so that really, more than anything, is why I'm involved, is because I feel like this is something we can do in Calgary. I feel like we are way less likely to cling to old labels, to cling to old party lines. That this is a city where people are willing to just take a chance and do something that they've never tried before. That might be knocking on doors for me. That might be making some phone calls for me, definitely voting for me. I hope all of you will. But really getting behind the idea that federal politics does not have to be this dreary choice between the same couple of brands that it's always been. This is not about the party I represent. This is about the city I want to represent. And so that, more than anything, is why I want to do this, because I feel like there is a version of Calgary, a great version of Calgary, the true Calgary Centre for sure, that just is not known outside of this city and needs to be known, because it's a terrific story and we've got fantastic ideas and we need to tell them. So as I said, nobody gets out of here until we have your name and hopefully your vote. And then beyond that, we hope that you will tell people, you know what, there's something happening in the city and there are people who are really engaged in it, and I think we should, I'm not saying, that necessarily I've earned everyone's support yet. Give me a chance to earn their support. Ask your neighbors, ask your friends, would you be willing to come have a cup of coffee with this guy in my living room, 8 or 10 or 12 of you, and I will be there. I will make the same case. I really believe that there is a story about Calgary that we are telling right now that ends with the second Green MP in Canadian history sitting in Parliament for Calgary Centre. So thank you, all of you, for your time. And with that, do you field the questions? Do I field the questions?
I think if we see a hand up, we can point at it.
A hand or a shoe? Quite all right.
Tactics, the more conservative elements use is they like to accuse environmental people of derailing the gravy train. How would you reassure people that the economic security of our energy-intensive economy?
As someone who has researched, written, and spoken about climate and energy and sustainability issues across the board, audiences ranging from, yes, your traditional environmental groups, all the way to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, the Alberta Institute of Agronomists, which is a whole bunch of people who work in, agrologists, a whole bunch of people who work in the oil patch. What I can tell them is, I don't think we have got a conversation about energy in this country that Canadians trust anymore, regardless of political stripe. I don't think this incredibly divisive, settling of scores and, creating teams and pitting them against each other gets us to where we need to go. From the industry's point of view, it's a huge liability that they are not able to earn the public trust even at home, let alone globally, which is what they need now. I mean, it's a global industry. There is global engagement on issues of carbon dioxide emissions, pipelines, oil shipment, the rest of it. You can't just sit in Fortress, Alberta, and say it's okay here. We need a process that we can show the world and say, you know what, this is the world's best environmental stewardship program of any oil industry in the world. We are using this resource as a springboard to a transition to a greener economy with a lot more renewable energy in it. We understand, we get it, we're part of the conversation. I don't think you can do that in Stephen Harper's Canada. I don't think he can make that argument credibly anymore. And that would be the argument that I would make. Other questions, other concerns, other... Nothing? I didn't even get into heavy policy stuff. Come on.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching the 5-minute summary about thorium and a lot. I guess I've got 2 points, and I thought maybe you could just comment on them however you want. All the guys who I've talked to that are involved in nuclear power, they seem, in my mind, to be serious environmentalists, and it seems like the Green Party for a long time now has been turning away a lot of people that are environmentalists because we are anti-nuclear.
Right.
I know that you favor technology that's already been developed, but nuclear power has experienced NIMBY for ages, right? And I think that maybe there's something to be said for the NIMBY that wind faces might be a different NIMBY that nuclear faces, right? There might be a different market for those two things, or you're not get the same people protesting both at the same time, because that doesn't leave a lot else.
If I'm understanding you correctly, it's a question of where does nuclear fit in a green future, essentially.
Yeah, and I can't imagine it not fitting, I guess, is where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I certainly am aware of that argument. And what I would say is that when I talk about a serious energy conversation in this country, what I would say first of all, and I've said this, in books, I've said this, publicly before I was trying to earn votes. Everything's got to be on the table. I don't think you can out of hand say that particular technology we are not touching. Whether that's clean coal, which is currently kind of a false flag. Whether that's a next generation of nuclear. Whether it's renewables we haven't even thought of yet. Whether it's oil and gas. What we need to do is have a serious conversation about what stuff works, and what doesn't, and what needs government support to get to where it goes. If you can see a place. And I certainly know this from the renewable side even better. 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when I first started researching this stuff, solar was a future tense fairy tale. And it stayed there until a number of governments, particularly the German government, said, no, we're going to make solar a mainstream technology. And they did, and it works. And all of that idea that solar doesn't work at a mainstream level is gone now, except in places where they haven't been paying attention to what's happening in Germany right now. I would make a similar argument for nuclear power. I would say it has to prove itself on the same playing field. And what that means, I think, more than anything is, if you come to governments, and this certainly happened with conventional nuclear, existing nuclear technology in Ontario, with proposals that made no economic sense, that basically asked, continue to give us the enormous subsidy and the enormous free ride that you've been giving nuclear in Ontario and the rest of Canada for half a century. The Ontario government, when they first looked at that was when they passed the Green Energy Act and started investing big in renewables, because that made no economic sense. It still makes no economic sense. Conventional nuclear, in my opinion, has not made the economic case for itself before we even get into issues of waste and remediation, that sort of thing. That said, if there are new technologies, they should definitely be part of the consideration. When we take the technology fund that the Alberta government has to invest in future energy technologies. When we look at a federal level at strategic investment in R&D, where do we want to put money? What does Canada's energy future look like? Everything should be on the table. And we need to decide what needs the most emphasis. Some stuff is very near term, if not present tense. And that's the thing with conventional renewables, if you will, is they are present tense. They work now all over the world. If we want to shut down coal plants now, they can do the job. And they've proven that. Whereas I don't think nuclear has made the case for itself yet. I think it can and should be permitted to. And this is maybe where I differ with some of the sort of older thought in Green Party type circles, that I don't think you dismiss it out of hand. I think you say, you know what, let's give them a chance to make their case as well. I haven't seen the case made personally to me yet. I haven't seen an example where you can deploy next generation nuclear on time, on budget, with the rapidness and the effectiveness that you can do renewables right now. And so that's why I tend to favor them over next generation nuclear. And I believe the current generation of nuclear, CANDU reactors and all that kind of stuff, has proven that it can't get there, just from a straight economic point of view. So.
The current government has suspended the federal skilled worker program. Essentially all of our immigration programs are done until further notice. But some reason we have huge numbers of temporary foreign workers coming in and other foreign workers coming in through the live-in caregiver program and the seasonal agricultural program. What is the Green Party stance on that, particularly, or in immigration in general? Because I don't see that a lot, and that's my area of interest.
And I will confess, it's not really prominent in the Green Party platform. I can speak for me personally. What I would be interested, the conversation I would be interested in instigating, first with the Green Party, and second, and this is one of the things, by the way, just to quickly digress and underscore, the great thing about the Greens is it's a party still learning and evolving. So if I'm the second member in a two-member caucus, I have a huge say in what policy looks like. You're not going to get that deal from anyone else running in Calgary Centre, I can promise you. But on this specific case, one of the greatest resources that Canada has is the human resource of immigration. To shut out the actual path to citizenship and just want the labor is ridiculous. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that at a federal level, what the policy looks like. I don't know exactly how we get to a sane immigration policy. I won't pretend I have all those answers here tonight, but I think that's where the conversation starts, is that we mutually benefit by granting Canadian citizenship to people who work hard here and by them coming here and becoming Canadian citizens. Canada benefits from that, the immigrants benefit from that. To take that and kind of throw it out rather hastily is really bad policy and really unfair to the people who come and work and give their adult lives to the country. And that's never been the Canadian way. That's not who we are. We're a nation of immigrants. And to suddenly say that deal's off is terrible policy.
Okay. From a federal point, you get elected, Calgary Central. What's the number one issue?
Urban infrastructure. The federal government properly paying its share of transit, other urban infrastructure. There's a, whatever it is, $240 billion urban infrastructure deficit right now, everything from sewers and roads to transit to rec centers to schools, all the stuff. The federal government is supposed to be meeting its chunk of the money. There's 2 rec centers for sure that I know of in the riding, that one of which was supposed to be built, the other of which was supposed to be renovated, that are waiting on federal money. And that story you'll hear in cities across Canada, because we've got a government that doesn't really care about cities particularly. They never talk about cities. They don't talk about city issues. And that, I would say, and that's also why, by the way, we're advocating a national transit strategy. We're the only G8 country doesn't have one. So we're making the cities solve the problems piecemeal, make it up as you go along, see if you can cobble together a coalition and then beg us for the money we should be giving you from the federal government's point of view. And then these 2 things, I think, point at the obvious third thing, which is that cities need more autonomy. This is something certainly that I learned from our mayor and completely agree with, which is that Calgary is a city of 1.2 million, which is currently adding every year a Wetaskiwin's worth of people, has a Wetaskiwin's worth of power as a government. Same deal we had, when the CPR arrived. That's not how a modern urban economy functions. And beyond what it would mean for Calgary Centre and all the nice things we'd like, this is the urban century, the first truly urban century. cities that make the right infrastructure investments now, that invest in livable communities and walkable communities and multimodal transit and the rest of it, are the ones that are going to lead and prosper. You talk to Calgary Economic Development, you talk to anyone involved in human resources, they'll talk about how hard it is to get and retain the top talent. They're not moving to a city because it looks good on a postcard, they're moving to a city because it's great to live in, and that's where urban infrastructure plays a huge role. So that's absolutely top, in part because we start with Calgary. If we've got other goals, they are also part of what I would want to do as an MP, but I begin by wanting to do right by Calgary, particularly Calgary Centre, as the center of a city that I think has been neglected by the federal government for far too long.
One of my concerns at the federal level is the constant erosion of the public service, and then the fact that eventually 40,000 people are going to be fired. StatsCan's lost half, Parks Canada, you name it. I think even the Justice
Environment Canada, DFO, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. What kind of platform, or how can you raise that? People actually believe that the government's been fat and it needs to be kind of like streamlined, or these people are sitting around doing nothing. So what's the Green Party going to give to that? By
going and looking at all the amendments Elizabeth May tried to attach to that absolute mess of a budget, C-38. And I think everyone in the room knows this, right? That she and this was Elizabeth's genius, and probably the moment where, much as I've always respected her, I was willing to kind of go into battle with her, was watching her by herself turn what was supposed to be an omnibus blur into this 22-hour marathon, standing ovation from the rest of the opposition. Look at all the amendments she attached, which were all really smart, pointed sort of things about that shouldn't be cut. That shouldn't be cut. If you look at the cuts, it really wasn't to streamline government. It was to eliminate the government's ability to catch itself out on stuff that it wanted to do. That's what they were very, very precise changes, and all of those need to be stopped, reversed, rethought. Everything from basic science research like the Experimental Lakes area and Pearl, which is the High Arctic Research Station, all the way down to some of the sort of public service staffing. And I agree with you. I think the public service is an incredibly important and deeply undervalued job to do. And there are skilled people who know what they're doing, and to sort of suggest that it's fundamentally less efficient and less valuable than the private sector is entirely wrong. I think that goes beyond just people working in the public service. The whole public sphere has been undervalued for too long. So that would be where I think we would begin the conversation. Is let's go back and look at a terrible budget bill and see what we could fix out of that. That, of course, would probably at this point require a change of government. So that's a couple steps down the road. But
like keep it public and keep it in the public.
Yeah, and I think Elizabeth's done a great job of that. I think we are seeing. I'm currently at work in my former day job at quite a bit of research on what sort of cuts were made to basic science, and I've been talking to a lot of scientists who will tell you that they are feeling moved to act politically in ways that they never have before in their careers, because this is such a reckless sort of slash and burn approach, particularly to environmental science. If you look at, there's been a lot of stuff around, but environmental science is really where the deepest and most precise cuts were made, and I think that's where the Green Party certainly could lead that conversation to say, hey, we're not a one issue party at all, but we can certainly contribute to the conversation about what a modern environmental stewardship regime looks like, particularly because Elizabeth wrote a bunch of it when she was in Brian Mulroney's environment ministry. No one knows it better than her, and no one knows better what needs to be in there. So I think that's where we can really lead.
Would you care to comment on having China buy Nexen?
Even if I don't care to, I should. You know what? I will confess that I am not an international trade lawyer or expert. So can I sort out everything that's in that deal and tell you, is it good or bad? It's very, very good for Nexen shareholders right now. We know that. So no wonder they want to see it happen. I know that Elizabeth May has said and written a number of things about provisions in the deal that appear to give a Chinese government-controlled company, a Chinese state-controlled company, pretty serious powers of recourse to sue the Canadian government should the rules change not in their favor in the future. And I don't, like I said, I don't fully understand these, but my understanding is that there are provisions in that deal that look pretty similar to some of the stuff that has really come back to bite us out of NAFTA, where you couldn't properly regulate companies because they were granted rights in trade agreements. Again, I don't fully understand it. I think absolutely it needs more scrutiny. I think that the conversation should be much more transparent and public about this, and we need to be careful. I do think it's a fundamentally different thing from partial state investment or directly in the oil sands. There's a Chinese government company basically that does not play by the same rules as everyone else necessarily. So I think we're right to scrutinize the heck out of it. And what I don't see is anyone on the government side. They're certainly saying that they're having a long talk about it, but they don't seem to be telling us a lot about what they're talking about, and which is pretty typical of this government, and entirely the wrong way to go about it. They're going to come up with some sort of decision and then just present it as a fait accompli, probably. I'd like to know what they're considering, and I think that's a conversation we should be having.
What are your ideas or thoughts on maintaining connection to constituents once elected, in terms of engaging constituents in the policy discussion and other ways of dealing with issues of governance?
So I would say, I hope I would take the same approach that I'm already taking as a candidate, which is if I meet somebody who lives in Calgary Centre or in Calgary generally, who understands an issue better than I do, have them tell me about it and figure out ways to continue to do that. Whether I'm in Ottawa or not. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I certainly agree that we have a political system that sort of checks in once every 4 or 5 years and then checks out. And I don't think that that's the way in a modern digital society to conduct a government. So I would certainly be open to a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here in Calgary municipally. Other cities and other countries have begun to talk about allowing for a much more sort of permeable interface between constituents and the people who pass their policy. What exactly that looks like is another one of those things that I don't have the clearest snapshot, but I would definitely consider the biggest part of my role, again, because I'm not part of the government, I'm not part of the official opposition. I think I would have more time and probably a lot more reason to engage locally than if I were part of, if I were the 101st nay vote or the 163rd yay vote. And that would, what I hope is that we are already building the kind of community of engaged Calgary Centre residents who can keep me informed and keep that conversation going.
Austerity is, I think, something that's emerging as the global issue and the Canadian issue. It's something we're going to become very familiar with. The program and policy decided or agreed upon, at least at the G20 in Toronto, this idea of austerity that we see Spain and Greece rising up against, and we've seen Occupy address that certainly. This is the agenda of Harper's government. In that context, Calgary is a symbol, and beyond that context, of course, Calgary is a symbol, so that your win here is, I think, seen as a foil to moves of a proto-fascist government, of industrialists, of a Harper agenda, of the Calgary School of Economics and the Calgary School of Public Policy. This idea that has really emerged from Calgary and has derailed Canada. I guess the question is, how does the Green Party and how do you see your role in being that foil and bringing that up? Because I think that is the paramount question of our time, is to move through economic disaster and failure into a new society.
Well, I mean, I think to begin with, I don't know about a foil. I definitely agree with you that a win for my campaign in Calgary Centre would be seen as sending a pretty clear message to the government and to certain, to the Prime Minister and certain other senior members who see this as their base, that they can't they can't trust that base is as solid as they like to think it is, to begin with. The second thing, I pretty fundamentally agree with you. I think we have an economic system that is predicated on a particular model of growth. And I would argue that growth is mainly predicated on the idea of cheap energy, and that you can continue to grow the amount of energy in the economy on that same scale. And since we know that not to be the case, we need to be really, thinking very, very hard about what kind of economic system we're going to build for resilience in the decades to come. And you begin that, I think, by recognizing that some of the old power equations may not add up anymore if they ever did. And what the exact nuts and bolts of that, I'm not sure, but certainly I don't think you look at that. I mean, we did reasonably well comparatively in the near term economically, because we didn't buy so completely into that sort of free market ideology as the United States did and certain other countries did. Now we're patting ourselves on the back for it as sort of the only ones who woke up from the party with nothing broken. And I don't think that the response to that is to say, well, we had it all solved, so let's keep going the direction we're going. I think we need to be asking really fundamental questions about what a sustainable economic system looks like. And I won't pretend that we've figured out all the answers to that yet, but I think you begin by recognizing that it's not just a question of kind of tidying up at the fringes. I think that there are some really fundamental questions about the limits to growth and the limits to the amount of environmental toll you can take without having to pay for it. And that would be probably where I'd like to see that conversation begin, is by recognizing that we need to pay the full price of the things we do. And one great place to begin that is, of course, by putting a price on carbon dioxide. And that would be the kind of thing that, as part of that sensible energy equation we need to be having, that I think the Green Party could lead, which is, let's stop yelling slogans at each other and actually talk about putting a price on carbon, which even lots of big business interests believe to be the only possible way forward, which we know doesn't destroy economies, which we know is a thing. Figure out what mechanism we want to use, but let's not be stupid about it and pretend that it's some sort of ideological error. And actually, stop with it. And I think that, by the way, I think that goes on both sides. I mean, at this point, it's mainly the official opposition and the government yelling at each other about this. I don't think either of them is being completely honest about what the impact of an actual price on carbon dioxide would look like. I think they're both kind of towing opposite lines for sport, basically, at this point.
So I'm at the beginning of my research on the Green Party as a whole, as well as understanding the other participants that you'd be up against. But if I was to go into work tomorrow, and someone was to ask me what I did last night, there's a lot of misconceptions about the party. And so I'd like to know, when you were considering running, what were the ahas? I didn't know that, or I had a misconception about the Green Party that you'd want the other people on the bus to share with people in terms of spreading the word about you, as well as the party people I represent.
Well, I think, one of the biggest ones, although I'll confess I didn't just figure this one out when I was considering the run, is that the Green Party has a radical economic policy, because it doesn't. It's actually pretty mainstream, moderate, classically conservative economic policy built on a sustainable foundation. So the kind of baselines and the margins are changed to make sense in what we now know is the true cost of what we do. But within that framework, it's a pretty moderate economic plan by current Canadian standards. It's very close to center. So that's number one. That there's no sort of doctrinaire, left-wing economic plan buried in there anywhere. So that I would say that's first of all. The second thing is that the Green Party is often thought of as being against industry, particularly against the fossil fuel industries. I don't think that's true if you look at the policy. I think we're for the same sort of stuff someone like Pembina Institute would advocate, which is really, really sensible, responsible development of natural resources as a engine to get us to a much less fossil fuel dependent economy. So those, I would say, those are probably the two biggest. The number 3 one in Calgary, for various historic reasons, has to do with the Green Party possibly being a single issue marijuana legalization party. You hear this remarkably often once you start saying I'm running for the Green Party. Aren't you guys in favor of legalizing marijuana? And true, there is, that is part of the platform. The way I would look at that, though, is to say that the Green Party fundamentally recognizes that our current drug laws don't work, and that if we were to apply them as currently construed, particularly regarding marijuana, we would have to incarcerate God knows how much of the country, not to mention put a whole bunch of people out of their second line of work. So in light of that, we need to revisit that. We need to have a grown-up conversation about that too. What we are finding in the current sort of system of drug laws is that they don't work very well for people anywhere along the line. Like prohibitions anywhere, prohibition makes the production more dangerous, makes the consumption more dangerous, makes the sale more dangerous, fuels gangsterism. The idea that harsher drug laws would reduce gangsterism goes against several centuries of gangsterism and everything we know about it. And so that all needs to be revisited. And certainly we can begin by saying that, like a lot of its policies, the Harper government's crime bill is fundamentally anti-evidence, fundamentally against what we know to work, and that is a conversation we need to revisit. So I think those are probably the three biggest misconceptions I've heard. Is that the economics are anything but moderate, that the party is anti-industry, which it isn't, and that the party is for legalization sort of for the fun of it, as opposed to wanting to have a serious conversation about crime and punishment generally and prohibition especially.
Chris, following our conversation the other night, your ideas on how to excite the younger generation evolved at all? Because when I look at the strategy of you winning here, we have a bunch of fixed groups, but the basic game can occur in that demographic.
So how do we win the youth vote? How do we engage the youth? Well, I would say in addition to simply room by room as we're doing, the big thing that we have in the works and will eventually start enrolling is an engagement plan or an engagement strategy really designed at creating energy and media attention and a general sort of vibe around the campaign that will look and feel like something very, very different from what we've seen previously in federal politics. I think a lot of people are disengaged. Young people particularly aren't particularly engaged at a party level. They're not, doctrinaire for any particular party, and kind of look at the whole process as not really about them. And I don't think that that's a bad read of how we currently practice federal politics in Canada. I don't think that there's a lot of effort made to do anything other than shore up base votes and fight them. So how do you engage youth? We're talking about doing a lot of the same sort of stuff that I study from an urban sustainability perspective. So let's create events around the riding. Let's do urban interventions at the scale of a transit stop, for example. One of my favorite things that I often tell audiences before we can actually get into the bigger conversation about building all of the transit infrastructure we need, which takes budgets and bills and policy and debates and the rest of it, we can start just making the transit we already have much nicer. The other way I like to say that is we can make it awesome every now and then. And right now it's just, if you have to stand at the bus stop, stand at the bus stop, and it will not be very nice. So if we show up at particular places where a lot of people have to stand in not very nice weather, maybe with a couple tables to sit at, some coffee to hand out, let's sit and talk about what kind of city we want. Maybe that's a way to engage people who wouldn't normally be engaged in politics. This is just one example, one of the things we'd like to be doing. We're wide open to other ideas about how to do this engagement, but definitely a big part of what we want to do is create some excitement around this. I think we do get to build on the fact that there's a real sense, growing in part out of the last municipal campaign, that politics can be fun and interesting in Calgary. And I think we definitely are hoping to catch some of that energy as well, and then create our own unique version of it as well.
With regards to the election, I guess part of the job is to convince people that they should turn out and actually not vote a Conservative in. And how do you plan to convince those people that of all people to vote in, that it shouldn't be a Liberal or an NDP, that it should be a Green Party candidate, when what they can look forward to is a tag team of two people out there alone in Ottawa?
Right.
Why would they, if they're going to vote out a Conservative, why shouldn't they vote in a Liberal or an NDP that at least seems to have a party to support them in Ottawa?
Right. Good question. If you vote NDP or Liberal, presuming the NDP or Liberal candidate was someone you thought could win, you would be voting for the 101st or the 36th member of a caucus of people sitting on a party platform that's already pretty much been decided and that the arrival of the by-election winner from Calgary Centre is not going to make a fundamental difference too. There are bigger conversations going on in those parties about what direction they want to take. They are simply looking for one more seat. The Green Party wants one more partner in where it wants to go. Green Party is not looking to win all 4 by-election seats that are coming up this fall. It is looking to win Calgary Centre. And more than that, wants me there, specifically. And I think that's a fundamentally different value proposition. Yes, we can't formulate policy. We're not the official opposition. We don't get to talk as much in Parliament, but we get to talk, as the second member of a 2-person caucus, I would get to talk about exactly what I ran on and exactly what Calgarians need to hear at the federal level, not, the occasional little pet project as a side event to whatever the whole caucus has already decided is what we actually care about this session. And so I would say that more than anything is that I give an opportunity to actually speak about Calgary, what Calgary wants. I'm not, trying to get my voice heard among a caucus that has already made up its mind about a lot of things. The second thing I would say is that I don't think there's another team in the race that can win. And I'm not saying that to congratulate myself so much as to congratulate the volunteers that I've already attracted. I don't think there's anyone who can beat us. Other than possibly the Conservatives if enough people don't vote.
I thought it was more general one about Quebec. Just your thoughts
about Quebec.
As far away as they seem. I mean, there's a wrench that's really throwing a wrench into the whole political scene, right? Again.
Fundamentally, I really, really value Quebec's contribution to Canada, as we all do. I also think that a lot of its politics have a lot more to do with what's happening internally in Quebec than what's going on in the national conversation. And I think using Quebec as an excuse for bad federal policy is not the right way to go, or bad federal dialogue. From my own time that I've spent in Quebec and from Quebecois that I've known, they are no more or less Canadian than I am, and that their politics reflect their own internal concerns at the provincial level, not some larger conversation necessarily about Canada. I think there's entirely too much fear in that conversation. What we do at the federal level I couldn't say offhand. I think that the federal government currently is not doing a great job of interprovincial affairs generally. So I think there's a whole other conversation that probably needs to happen there, and that's not just about Quebec. The current sort of squabbling between British Columbia and Alberta about resources is another one where the federal government has basically said, we will forego what is supposed to be our jurisdiction, which is interprovincial disputes, and just let you sort of fight it out, and everyone knows which side we're on, which I don't think is a particularly fair way or equitable way to run things. And I think it speaks to the fundamental lack of credibility that the government now has in a lot of circles, that they aren't seen as fair broker in very many circles anymore, where there are really contentious political issues, and that's one of the things that's, I've certainly heard already from potential voters in Calgary Centre is that they are really tired of that level of divisiveness, and that it doesn't really reflect. I think maybe I'm wrong. I think most of us in this room don't feel like we live in a country that is particularly angry at itself. But we certainly have a politics that portrays us as incredibly angry at each other. And so one of the things hopefully, we can do, and certainly it's been, one of Elizabeth May's great projects, I'm not sure how successful she's been to date, is to try and bring a certain amount of decorum back to our government. And I think sometimes she feels like she's the only one trying to do that, but she's certainly willing to, and certainly nobody knows, or respects Parliament more than she seems to. So, should we leave it at that and then move to more informal?
There's beer to be drank.
There is, and I've made all these people sit.
Yes.
So, I will, as one final comment, one of the great things about building a campaign from scratch and not having some party machine in the room is that all the details of all the things you do early on will become enormously amplified when we all tell this story years from now after a long career in federal politics. It was the first snowfall of the year, and we were at the upstairs at the Legion, drinking Pilsner, and everyone in the room joined the team and signed on and knocked on doors, and that's how we won. So that'll. Yeah.